supported by the State Library of Ohio, with federal funds from the Institute of Museum and Library Services. Last week, the library showed the Emmy-nominated documentary, DEI, Inclusion Shouldn't Be a Lottery, which unearthed discrepancies between insider and outsider perspectives of DJ Savarese's lived experience as an alternatively communicating autistic person. We're happy to have DJ with us today, presenting on self-direction in college.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming to today's talk on developing self-directed supports in higher education. My name is DJ Savarese. Here are some of the things I've been working on since graduating from Oberlin College in 2017. Today I'm going to be talking with you about the financial, social, emotional, and academic supports that helped me on my journey from high school through college. Each person's journey is unique depending upon their educational background, the kind of college they choose, where they live, their interests and aspirations, and the resources they have and need. I think some of you have seen my documentary films. Inclusion Shouldn't Be a Lottery, but if you haven't, here's a quick description of my circumstances. I was fully included in the regular education curriculum from kindergarten through high school graduation, first in Florida and then in Iowa. My dad teaches at a private liberal arts college in central Iowa, but after an extensive college tour in Iowa, Ohio, and New York, I opted to apply early decision to Oberlin College, a private, residential, liberal arts college outside Cleveland, and I needed extra financial support. I took a gap year and I started at Oberlin in September of 2012, graduating in May of 2017 Phi Beta Kappa with a double major in anthropology and creative writing. So let me start with the financial supports that made it possible for me to attend and graduate from Oberlin. They included scholarships, support from 2 vocational rehabilitation agencies, and Oberlin College itself. Scholarships played an important role in my financial support and also added work experience and award recognition to my CV or resume when I graduated. I began thinking about scholarships my junior year in high school and continued through graduation from college. Ohio Vocational Rehab required me to apply for and try to get at least 3 scholarships per year in exchange for their financial support. I wasn't required to win that many. I was only required to apply for that many. I loved being able to say that I had earned a lot of my tuition money. I also saw that I could make money and not be solely dependent upon my parents. For example, I used one of my high school $1,000 scholarships to buy a new laptop for college, and 2 of the bigger scholarships, the Herbert Hoover Uncommon Student Award, particular to Iowa residents, and the Autistic Self-Advocacy Scholar Fellow Program, which was a national program, involved doing advocacy work, which in turn led to my winning the Big Open Society Foundation Human Rights Initiative Community Youth Fellowship right as I graduated from college. It might be worth noting the variety of kinds of fellowships I applied for and received. For example, none of the scholarships I won in high school were particular to students with disabilities, and all of them were limited to state or local residents. I happened to design my Uncommon Student Award project around disability. It was entitled Plotting Hope, Giving Voice to Non-Speaking People, but I was the only one of the 10 to 15 finalists who identified as having a disability. During college, 2 of the 4 scholarships were nationally based and specific to autism, and 2 of them were Oberlin College based and specific to my success academically. I tell you this to encourage students to apply for a range of different scholarships. I heard about the ones I applied to from my school counselor, from the Dream listserv, and from the admissions office and my academic department, as well as from websites like QuestBridge. I also regularly Google Autism Scholarship. In addition to scholarships and my parents, I also receive financial assistance from both Iowa and Ohio vocational rehab and from my college to cover the expense of books, technology, and support assistance, both in and out of class. I received support from 2 different states VR because I went to a residential college out of state and thought I would likely settle in Ohio after I graduated, since I come from a small college town in Iowa with limited employment possibilities. I should mention that I moved to Ohio 7 months before college started and contacted Ohio VR almost immediately, and it took until late September to know I could get their support. It was a fairly new experience for the 2 states agencies to collaborate. I should also mention that I didn't receive any extra services, and it was imperative that no services be duplicated, so if one state's agency offered a tuition stipend, the other state couldn't. In my case, the 2 agencies split their financial support like this. Iowa VR paid for up to 50 hours per week of out-of-class communication support assistance. Ohio VR paid for my books, for technology, such as an iPad, for 35 hours per week of personal care assistance, and for a yearly tuition stipend. Although I was at a private, 4-year college, Ohio VR based their stipends on the cost of community college the first 2 years and on the cost of in-state university tuition the last 3 years. Services from both states' vocational rehabilitation agencies were dependent upon my having status as a full-time student and dependent upon my satisfactory completion of my coursework and the required paperwork and documentation, including an employment goal for after graduation. Neither agency objected to supporting me over 5 years instead of 4. In fact, both said most students work through college at a much slower rate. In addition to the 5-year grant they offered me, Oberlin College paid for a support assistant during class time and during any school-sponsored event or club I attended and provided me, and any other student, with free use of Kurzweil and Microsoft Word. That concludes my section on the financial supports I used. At the end of the presentation, I'll be happy to answer any questions you might have, but for now, let me continue on to the social and emotional supports I created and used. I opted to take a gap year between high school and college. It was then I met Jen Brooks, who was in her first year at Grinnell. I took a course in anthropology at Grinnell, so I'd know what to expect from a college course and would know I was prepared to do the academic work required at a school of Oberlin's caliber. And I moved to Oberlin halfway through the year to allow me to get familiar with the town and to start the application process with Ohio Vocational Rehabilitation. I loved being able to read, work on my documentary film, relax for a year, give a few talks and events at colleges, and find, hire, and train my first college support assistant. I chose and trained my support assistants, who were young and recent graduates of Oberlin College or a nearby college. Oberlin allowed me to do this even for my in-class assistants. I love being around people my own age, and my assistants were familiar with the college campus and with college life. I could talk to them without my mom present. Most students thought my assistants were just good friends of mine who happened to be taking the same course that I was. It was fun to know I already had at least one close friend in every class. Although I hired and trained my support assistants, my mom did the first round of interviews to be sure the person was willing to commit to staying for at least an academic year, to explain how they'd be paid, and to make sure they weren't smokers or something that was an instant deal breaker for me. But I did the rest. train people a lot faster myself and could transition to them much more quickly without her around. Everyone met their commitment. 3 assistants even opted to stay on for 2 years, and 1 assistant was so good I hired him despite his admitting up front that he could only stay for 1 semester. I wanted assistants who loved learning and were willing to read and write for long hours. In class, they modeled focused engagement for me and made sure I got every chance to be heard in class discussions. I usually had assistants with no foreknowledge of any of the classes I took. I chose to go out of state to college because I wanted to start over as my own person and not as my parents' child. And I've also spoken a lot about interdependence and self-efficacy, 2 principles that still guide my decision-making. When I first wrote about interdependence, well-meaning neurotypicals thought my autistic allies would be furious, but actually, I have yet to meet a neurodiverse person who hasn't embraced interdependence. I used to think freedom was independence, and now I realized freedom is the room to breathe and to grow. Freedom is about connecting with others. Unlike independence, interdependence is hopeful and involves relating to myself as an integral part of something bigger than myself. Once I started at Oberlin, my well-being still depended upon my being an integral part of the courses I took and other activities on campus. I used my poetry workshops and my small discussion classes as a way to find and connect with other students who shared my interests or outlooks. I lived on campus at my college not because it was easy, but because it offered me lots more opportunities to meet and connect with my friends. I honestly believe if I hadn't lived on campus in a place of my own, I would have missed out on so much. I spent 1 semester adjusting to classes before moving into the dorm overnight. I did work and met friends there during the day from the very beginning and moved in full-time at the beginning of my 2nd semester. I opted to live in the same college suite all 5 years, which offered me a sense of home at a time when I needed it most. I used the added space to host dinners and creative art salons with my friends. Because I'm not a partier, the art salons were a chance for everyone to soberly celebrate each person's talents in poetry, fiction, film, music, conducting, choreography, dance, visual arts, and digital music. I also enjoyed attending musical events at a small venue on campus called CAT in the Cream and regularly attended college-sponsored readings, concerts, speakers, and dance performances with friends. I also loved meeting a friend for dinner or Sunday morning tea and just catching up. And sometimes, when my friends and I needed to blow off steam, we'd go to a trampoline gym or the local roller rink. I left college with 9 or 10 friends I visited multiple times since graduating. A few were support assistants, but most were friends I found along the way. In the last 3 years I was there, I collaborated on planning Neurodiversity Week events and co-taught a course on neurodiversity and advocacy. When I first arrived, no one seemed to publicly identify as disabled. By changing the title from Autism Awareness or Acceptance to Neurodiversity Week and inviting neurodiverse panelists and speakers, we were able to frame disability as a human rights issue and to encourage students to publicly identify as disabled. The year after we left, we were excited to learn that students had started all kinds of disability rights organizations on campus. I also found some professors who were more than teachers to me. I met my first advisor before I even started at Oberlin. She was handpicked and handpicked me as well. Eventually she became my professor, teaching my first year seminar on disability. Early on, she encouraged me to write to professors and get to know them before I even took their classes. And eventually, Like most college students, I studied with some of my favorite professors multiple times. I left college with about 8 whom I consider lifelong friends and who I see and correspond with regularly. I would strongly encourage students to rely on their relationships with professors for support as much, if not more so, than the Disability Support Services Office. I took 3.5 credits each semester. 3 were hardcore academic credits and counted toward graduation. Most half-credit courses were wellness classes, and none but the usual number for all students counted toward graduation. The half-credit did allow me to take 3.5 credits and still maintain full-time status. For the most part, I used my half-credit wellness courses to manage my anxiety. I took everything ranging from swimming to technology and communication to somatic-based and body practices such as biofeedback breathing, loving kindness, 4 energies, intentional meditation, Buddhist gathas, American Sign Language, and yoga. Before we move on, let's try out a few of the strategies I use a lot. Take a minute and write down answers to the question, what do you love? Okay, first, let's talk about the 4 energies. They are physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual. It's quite simple, but you might not remember to fuel them all. If I take some of the activities I love, I divvy them up this way. Someone else might divvy them up somewhat differently. That's okay. There's no one right answer. Some activities might rejuvenate different energies for each of us. Now, I'd like you to take your answers to what do you love and place them under the kind of energy they refuel for you. Keep in mind some might apply to more than one kind of energy. Take a minute to reflect on this snapshot of your energy sources. It's likely we all have 1 or more columns that are very full and 1 or 2 columns that are empty or almost empty. We can learn a lot about ourselves from this quick snapshot. Maybe we learned that we tend to think of our energy only in terms of physical energy. Or maybe we look and see our emotional column is empty or near empty. We can then ask ourselves, is that true? Am I a little emotionally empty or low right now? Please keep this initial this close at hand. And before you leave wherever you're sitting this afternoon, do yourself a favor and take the time to fill in those empty columns with some activities. Maybe you forgot some activities you love and can add those in. Or maybe you can choose some activities you'd like to try. Many of us quit trying new things as we supposedly grow up. Then use this list to quickly check in with yourself every night or every morning or once a week. However often works best for you. The 4 energies is one simple tool you can teach yourself to use. Next, I'd like to talk about the writing on our walls. The writing on our walls consists of beliefs about ourselves that we've collected throughout our life. They can be so powerful. Some people might think this is a negative concept, and it's true. The writing on our walls can have the power to isolate us or to narrow our perception of what's possible for us. But if we teach ourselves to be aware of them, how to access them, and then effective ways to erase and or add to them, we are able to empower ourselves to create the kind of life we want to live. Now that we've made ourselves aware that they exist, let me share with you some of the ways to access them. Sometimes we have ready access to them in a stranger's gaze or when the committee inside our head convenes and starts to bicker. And sometimes we confront literal external barriers. But often we don't have access to them. So we need to use some way to quiet our minds and see what's lurking beneath our consciousness. I love to use sensory prompts and movement to access mine. For example, I might use a 5-minute water meditation. Sometimes I read gathas or poetry, particularly poetry that sounds more than it tells, or I listen to instrumental music. I can also access it by rowing or running or going for a ride or a hike, some activity that is freeing and requires no words. Take 30 seconds now to jot down what any of your access activities might be or a reminder to do so. Maybe some are already on your chart of what you love. The beauty is, once we've accessed the writings on our walls, we can change them either by erasing them or adding new ones or even emboldening the messages we love. In the film, I do this proactively by placing positive reminders around my living space. This adds positive mantras in my head and increases the likeliness I'll remain aware of the writing on my walls. Expressing gratitude, reciting Buddhist gathas, and listening to hopeful, encouraging music also add positive messages to my walls and tend to enroll in the positive ones I already have. Erasing the negative ones and replacing them with something better usually requires a bit more work. For this I use an intentional meditation practice by Joe Dispenza, which I found in his book Your Diffus. He offers a template for intentional meditation that asks you to identify one specific belief about yourself you'd like to let go of and one you'd like to add. In the process, he asks us to use mental envisioning, gratitude, and potential energy to plant the seeds of possibility. Finally, many of you have heard me talk about the importance of self-efficacy and interdependence. By living a life in service to others, I am able to see myself as somehow essential to something bigger than myself. If I'm growing and connecting in a number of ways, then my walls don't define or confine me. If we can say we are making a difference in some way, then we are meditating on hope. Living life as a meditation focused on hope means forgiving yourself quickly when you succumb to fear. Consider it a distraction from the outside world, and maybe just guide yourself gently back to a place of hope, instead of raising those voices inside your head or using it as a chance to amplify the negative writing on your walls. We all succumb to fear from time to time, but if we can remain mindful of the writing on our walls and the writing we might be adding to someone else's walls, we can hopefully do better. Next, I'd like to talk about the academic supports I used. In high school, I opted to take the honors and AP or advanced placement courses and all the college level courses that were offered at the high school. I could have taken some Grinnell college courses too, but I opted not to. AP courses can count toward college if you score above a certain score on the AP exams. The college level courses I took at the high school could have counted for college credit if I had opted to attend community college after high school. The Grinnell College course I took during my gap year did transfer as a full credit course when I enrolled at Oberlin. Once at Oberlin, I got first priority registration, which ensured I got my top 3 course choices as long as I had the prerequisites for them. But in the last 3 years, I also attended some potential classes during drop-in week. I liked to know I'd made the right choices, and it also allowed me to experience the professor, the particular group of students, and the environment before committing to taking the class. I never actually did drop or add a class, but this allowed me not to be stuck in the ones I'd registered for if something about the professor, class size, or room was not a good fit. I found my top choices in the course catalog for each semester. I visually laid out the different weekly and daily schedules created by different combinations of courses I was interested in. Sometimes it was too much, but more than not it was okay. For example, sometimes my first choices would have required me to take classes back-to-back in a given day. That was a lot for me, but if classes were so good or offered by a visiting or retiring professor and might not be available in subsequent semesters, I sometimes opted for the more difficult daily schedule. I avoided intro-level lecture classes unless they were a requirement or prerequisite for a more advanced class, and, as I said earlier, I often took higher level classes because they are smaller and discussion-based. They offered more opportunities for conversation and for connecting with other students and the professor, some of whom are still my closest friends. Doing this visual planning as part of my course planning allowed me to know what I was committing to in advance. And unless I really wanted to take a particular course, I tried to avoid taking courses with visiting professors spring semester, knowing they were under enormous stress to find a new job for the following year. That being said, one of my favorite semesters involved taking 2 courses, both taught by visiting professors, and I'm grateful I did. The topics were never offered again and the professors were amazing. I also sometimes contacted professors to find out when they would be on sabbatical. If I wanted to take a particular course they taught, I wanted to plan ahead and be sure I could take it when they were around to teach it. I also strongly recommend the Oberlin College Planner. It gave me 4 different ways to look at all of my course requirements, daily, weekly, monthly, and semesterly. This gave me concrete, visual representations of perspective I needed. Tangible is better for me than on the computer. On the first day of classes, when I got the course's syllabi, I visually laid out all of my course requirements in all 4 formats, daily, weekly, monthly, and semesterly. The visual schedules allowed me to make sure during drop-in that the courses I had chosen didn't have major assignments due all at the same time. It also helped me choose when to present and or which reflective papers I could skip if not all were required. I usually tried, whenever presentations were required, to be the second or third person to present in the semester. This offered a chance for the other students who might not know me to find out more about me. Professors said it also tended to raise the level of presentations by any students whose presentations followed mine. The one exception was if my schedule was really packed, but pre-planning in this way allowed me to choose which matters most, the timing of when I presented, the topic of the presentation, or both. If more than one student presented on a given day, I always asked to go first, both to be able to set up and check my technology before class and to quell my nerves as much as possible. The professor understood if I then needed to take a break right after the presentation to bring my energy back to classroom mode. Did I ever take a class with a professor who gave out the syllabus 3 weeks at a time and quote, the interest of remaining flexible about the class's interests, end quote? No, I would never do that. I did this kind of thorough pre-planning on my own, but I think this is something any advisor and or disability support service staff members should do with students that could really help with attrition rates. I was able to participate in class discussions by asking professors to give reading prompts ahead of time. This helped all students read and discuss more articulately. It also allowed me to pre-record longer responses to those questions. I often started out the discussion because pre-recorded comments meant I couldn't revise them if someone had already made part of my point. This allowed my fellow students to expect me to be a valued contributor. My comments were articulate because they were written and done in advance, which often made other students' comments more thoughtful rather than simple verbal blathering. I then answered other spontaneous questions by writing out my thoughts and having my assistant voice my written responses aloud. My assistant also helped signal the professor when I had something to say, allowing me to be heard even when chatty students dominated discussion. I loved my classes and didn't take them for granted, so I promoted good energy in the room and a strong work ethic. I also loved working in partners and small groups, but I hated the process of randomly choosing partners, so it helped a lot for the professor to choose them or for us to sign up online ahead of time. And my eyes are not able to take in a lot of light at one time, so it was best if my group happened to gather where I was already seated. It also helped if a professor said hi and bye at the beginning and end of class. Regarding written assignments, I rarely required an extension because it made me too nervous. I avoided this by asking for paper topics well in advance. My ultimate professors had the paper assignments, requirements, and prompts in the syllables from the outset. This allowed not just me, but all students, a chance to take focused notes as we read and decided which articles to really focus in on for our papers. It also gave me the time I needed to begin early in order to hand my papers in on time. The professors also said it gave them a clear idea of what they wanted before the pressures of the semester took over and usually resulted in better papers from everyone. In closing, I'd like to return to the idea of self-direction and learning to rise and thrive. For me, self-direction has to do with interdependence, self-efficacy, and the right to make my own decisions, including taking risks and falling short if need be. Making my way to Overland was life-changing for me. I managed myself most of the time with only a communication assistant and sometimes spent time in the dorm and at school-sponsored events on my own. presentation has answered some of your questions and prompted others. I'd love to take time now to answer as many of them